Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, April 29th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about crops to grow in shadier areas, how to determine if a crop is worth growing, and why those weeds you are fighting weren't always weeds. So let's do it. All right, well, happy Tuesday, everyone. I hope you are having a lovely start to your weeks. I got a handful of things done yesterday, including planting a big bed of basil in the tunnel. Wouldn't be putting it outside right now just in case of a frost, but I have one account that has said they will buy several pounds per week of basil. So as long as that holds true, I will be good to go there. Otherwise, I will just have way more basil and pesto than I could ever use. Also got our parsley in and some other things that I'm not quite remembering at the moment done, but I'm sure they were awesome. Looking at the forecast, I'm not seeing blackberry winter, which concerns me a little bit that it's a trick, but that would mean no frost for the latter half of April. This job would just be easier if the weather would just, tell me what it was up to or be consistent, but, maybe one day, probably never. Anyway, so I was thinking the other day about how to help someone narrow down the list of crops that they should grow after their first year, but maybe just in general. And I realized that the answer is pretty simple, but it's going to require me to talk about soccer for a minute for analogy's sake. I promise this will hurt me more than it hurts you. I'm going to love it. So I was recently listening to this soccer coaching podcast, and the host, who I honestly never really liked, but I generally learned something from them, was going on and on about how much he hates research and that he hates when someone who isn't a full-time coach is presenting him with numbers that suggest coaches should be doing X or Y with their teams to improve performance. He said effectively, I've been doing this for 20 years. What do these guys know? When people send me research papers, I just throw it away. And that view completely bums me out. Sure, researchers may not be full-time coaches, and certainly they may not always be right. But one, you can learn something from basically anyone. And two, the research he was talking about was using numbers, and unless you yourself keep your own data, which it seemed like this host did not, then all you have to go on is vibes. And to be sure, vibes aren't worthless. Sometimes a coach just knows their team and has a feel for what the right decision is at that moment, and it works out. But we are also emotional creatures and full of hubris. So when we want to do something that the numbers tell us isn't the right thing to do, we tend to trust our gut instead, for better or worse. And then sometimes it works out and we think we're geniuses, or the numbers don't back up how we feel about something and we think they're idiots. But numbers, specifically statistics, don't tell us exactly what will or won't work. That's not their job. Numbers suggest what would give us the highest probability of success in a given context. So, circling back to farming, knowing what to grow or keep growing cannot itself be a vibes thing, or again, at least not wholly. It should be backed up by some amount of numbers, some kind of numbers, something that tells you this worked well and this did not. Indeed, even if you're just a homesteader and want to grow your own, some things make more sense than others to take up your limited space, and the numbers will tell you what those things are. Those numbers would be things like, I planted this much of X crop, it took me this long to grow it, it cost me this much in seed, and I earned this amount of money or got this yield. That is an exceedingly simple spreadsheet to put together that will effectively give you the data you need to decide if a certain crop is right for you, so you're not just going on vibes. Now, let's say you like cucumbers, but the yields weren't great. You definitely do not have to drop a crop that didn't work. Not at all. But it's good to know that one, you like growing that crop or your customers really like eating it. But also two, it's good to know how it did so you can pinpoint the crops that need to be improved upon efficiency-wise, or that maybe you can let go of. So maybe over the next couple seasons, you work on improving your production of that particular crop. Then you can look back at those numbers and see that you were able to or not able to improve the production and decide if it's still worth putting that energy into that or putting it into something else. On the opposite side, maybe a crop you didn't love growing does produce well for you, and you can then decide, okay, well, this is a crop that my family or customers clearly like and grows well here. What are the things about it that make me dislike growing it? And I can improve on those. So in that way, vibes are important, but it starts with the numbers, right? Because our perceptions of the world are not necessarily indicative of reality. That's kind of the value of science and the value of data, is that it quantifies what we perceive to be true, put simply. Of course, there is a way to take this idea too far, that using the numbers you arrive at, like just growing microgreens and lettuce and arugula, because those are the most profitable crops, that could lead you to just dropping every other crop and just focusing on those, which to me sounds especially boring, but to others may be exactly what they're looking for. Those may create the profitability and lifestyle that you are after. That, I guess, to some extent is a vibes thing as well. Conversely, maybe you are willing to grow some of the less profitable or productive crops because you just enjoy them. That's me and peppers, honestly. Not a profitable crop on our end, but one of my favorites to grow and eat in the garden and just look at. I love pepper plants. They're the best. And that's okay. But the numbers will tell you which of those crops will work and which of them need improvement or just don't fit your context. Anyway, all that to say, data will set you free. All right. Thoughts on that idea? How has data helped or possibly hurt your production? Let us know. And up next, how a lot of our weeds were once just crops. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still using QuickBooks for your farm's bookkeeping? You're wasting time and losing money. Farm finances can be overwhelming, but they don't have to be. FarmRaise Tracks is the all-in-one tool built just for farmers. Manage expenses, prep for taxes, run payroll, and plan for the future without spreadsheets or stress. Just clear, organized insights to keep your operation thriving. Thousands of farmers trust Tracks to make smart financial decisions all year long. It's time you did too. Use code NOTIL20, that's all caps, no spaces, NOTIL20 for 20% off the life of your membership at farmraise.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Does this show bring you $2 worth of value every month? $5? You can chip in. Just go over to patreon.com/no-till-growers and sign up. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon topic suggestion, which I love these, feel free to put in more topic suggestions, comes from Patreon member Alex Smith, who writes, quote, not a question per se, but with several conversations around indigenous agricultural practices, I thought you may find this interesting. I know there are several, quote unquote, weeds that are perfectly edible, and I never considered that they may have been cultivated or domesticated for food production in the past before the advent of maize and later colonization. Enjoy, end quote. And thanks, Alec, who attached a YouTube video, which I will link in the show notes, thus the enjoy at the end of that quote. It's about a variety of crops that researchers are discovering used to be a big part of indigenous diets and were bred that way. And indeed, Alec, this is right up my alley. I have talked before about the great, perhaps ironic thing about pigweed, for instance, as a weed, is that it was effectively cultivated by indigenous people for thousands of years, thus the tremendous vigor and thousands of seeds on the seed head because they used the seeds. Indeed, amaranth was a major grain crop of the Aztecs and many others all over the continent, and it still is for many. Another one, lamb's quarters, cousin of quinoa, is another crop like that, an enemy of the modern gardener, but was bred and spread and eaten widely by indigenous people, both as fresh green, delicious both raw and sauteed, but also as a grain. Chickweed was and is an important cultural food native to Europe that is known not just for its incredible array of pharmacological uses, but it's also quite tasty in a salad. And for that reason, chickweed has been cultivated and encouraged for thousands of years. Ditto tons of other crops, many of which have gone extinct or are in very small numbers now or hard to find. But on the other side of that are what we commonly refer to as weeds. Violets are one that I've had a lot of trouble with in recent years, a plant used by indigenous people for everything from headaches and joint pains to dysentery. I mean, the list honestly is quite endless because unlike today where plants we don't want to grow are considered nuisances, weeds, at a time before pharmaceuticals and cold food storage, plants were viewed much more as opportunities. All of them. Certainly plants were controlled and certain plants were removed from certain fields to encourage others throughout history, but a much greater diversity of plants were cultivated and encouraged. Modern society has latched onto a few of those plants like corn and squash, etc., while abandoning and even fighting with many others. One of the great losses in this switch of thinking isn't just a loss of diversity in our diets, but just pure potential. Maybe you're outside right now, or you will be shortly today. But every single plant you see has many, many uses. Medicinal maybe, or nutritional, or perhaps fiber, or some combination. Every single plant, tree, shrub, leaf, stem, root, flower, fruit, all of it has some use. And for thousands of years, people recognized that, even if they didn't know them all. But much of that knowledge was eradicated and discouraged in colonial pursuits, and a lot of that knowledge disappeared. And so now we call all of these useful plants weeds. The end. Just kidding. I think it's important that we not only acknowledge that reality, but that history and, as I've said before, that incredible loss. Certainly, there are still indigenous people keeping these things going, but what a loss. What a loss of knowledge and understanding and potential. There are, of course, people working to preserve that knowledge, but especially here in America, where the colonists were both incapable of recognizing the vast collective wealth of knowledge of the country, but also, even when they did, were unconcerned with preserving that knowledge. So now much of it is gone. And so yeah, circling back, one of the reasons so many of these crops are so prevalent today is that they are remnants of a time when humans wanted and needed them to be that way out of safety, health, and sustenance, and spread the things that we are now continuing to fight throughout the land, which is kind of incredible. Anyway, thoughts on that? Other examples that you enjoy? Does this change your view on weeds like pigweed, on food, on nature in general, on medicine? Check out that video. That has a few more examples as well. Let me know your thoughts, and up next, we'll take a quick break and then talk about what to do with that shady part of your garden. Be right back. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. I started a CSA to grow food and build community, not to drown in admin work. Spreadsheets, emails, and pack lists take up too much time. If I could spend less time at my desk and more in the field, that'd be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand automates billing, newsletters, websites, and member support, saving CSA farmers 20 plus hours a week. Focus on farming, not paperwork. See how Farmhand can help. Book a one-on-one demo with founder Ari at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, so maybe you have a shadier part of your garden for at least part of the year. So what the heck should you do with said area? Or more precisely, how can I make the most out of the spot and not waste it? And I'm going to give you a hint right here at the top. It's less about which crops can be grown and more about understanding the type of shade you're dealing with. So the first thing I will say is that there are a few different types of shade. Shade from a building that ain't really going anywhere. Shade from a greenhouse or high tunnel where it is shade, but a little light makes it through, like the plastic or whatever. And then shade from things like deciduous trees that isn't fully shade until part of the way into the spring, and even then lets some light through. And over winter may not be much shade at all when the leaves aren't on. All of those areas can be used, but should be used a little differently or at different times of the year. Some other things to think about when we're talking about shadier areas is that the soil will generally be cooler for longer than your sunnier spots in shadier areas, obviously. So any expectation to plant those areas at the same time should be met with an understanding that, say, beets planted in the ground that has been shaded for a while will not grow as fast as the ground that was in full sun. Beans, for instance, which germinate at a lower percentage in cooler soil, may not germinate as well, so you may have to sow them more densely. That sort of stuff. Also, during peak summer, the sun will be traveling straight overhead, so shadier areas won't be quite as shady then, which opens up the potential to use them for cover crops over the winter, perhaps, and then summer crops when the sun is straight overhead. Like if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that we have a spot next to one of our high tunnels where we will plant things like corn in the summer because it's getting plenty of sunlight, whereas in the spring, that tunnel shades those two beds. So it's cover crops over the winter and then corn during the summer, or we did pumpkins there one year too. Of course, it is a good idea this year to just map the shade and when it hits where and for how long, because if you're in Northern Europe, for instance, where you get 17 hours of sunlight a day in the peak of summer, what you can grow in the full sun or shady areas may be different from what you can get away with in other areas with more balanced sunlight distribution throughout the season or throughout the year. Like it is not dark until 10 or 11 o'clock in Florida, even in the middle of the summer. So, all right. So what crops can make sense for a shady area? Well, very few pure food crops love all shade all the time. If you have an area that gets almost no sun and not even diffused light like through leaves, then that's an area for shade-loving perennials, perhaps, like flowers and shrubs and maybe even some medicinal herbs like ginseng or black cohosh or something like that. A small amount of shade, though, especially in hot regions, you can grow basically any non-fruiting crop and even mini fruiting crops like cucumbers and tomatoes. You will see large expanses of shade houses in arid and hot regions where fruiting crops are grown on farms. Lettuces and greens can also work, and although I find the results to be lovely and tender, I do find the yield under shade to be lower on those sorts of crops. They're just not as heavy. Beet greens are amazing with a small amount of shady diffused light in the middle of the summer, though I will sometimes find that the beet itself will be smaller. Culinary herbs are generally good to go in small amounts of shade. If the shade doesn't come on until like late April, like maybe under certain oak trees that put on their leaves late, then that could be a great spot for things like rhubarb and asparagus and or overwintered crops in warmer regions. I probably would not put garlic there, but maybe other alliums like leeks or green onions or walla walla types that could be planted in the August of the year before and then harvested early in whatever that would be, like June, depending on where you are. Again, in hot regions, that shade may not be as shady, so it's good to figure out exactly what you're working with in terms of direct sunlight hours. And no doubt there is more I could dive into with this particular topic, but I'll let you all in the comments steer it a bit while I wrap it up here with one last word from our friends at Rimmel Greenhouses. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Don't forget, we here at No-Till Growers are now officially a 501c3, so your donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Just share it with friends. Let them know you're listening. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No-Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of April, Thursday, it's going to be May, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Dan Berta. So, all right. So yesterday we learned of this group that was having trouble finding farmland in their area. So they decided instead to build, some floating gardens out on a nearby lake. And the townspeople were furious, but technically there was a loophole in the law that allowed it. But while that was getting worked out in town hall meetings and calls to and from the mayor, another inhabitant, it's a hard word to say, of the lake was taking issue as well with the new residents, or at least becoming curious. You see, 100 or so years before this happened, a special cave was discovered at the bottom of the lake that had oxygen and plants and abundant fish. And so a group of folks escaping the townspeople went to live there and had, over the past 100 or so years, changed a little bit. How? Well, that's tomorrow. If we get some Patreon members, that's tomorrow. On the Mariners. I added the S. Actually, I can't remember if I had the S in there yesterday, but it's the Mariners now. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you tomorrow for Wednesday. Nice. Bye.